India Foundation and our founder, Dr. Sunita Reddy. Founded in 2011, Anthropos India Foundation promotes the discipline of anthropology, its philosophy, and its method to engage in applied and action research. Our work seeks to address issues of local communities through a bottom-up approach unique to their cultures and people. We conduct community based research rooted in local knowledge systems, local culture, and ecology to inform policy initiatives and drive transformational impact. AIF also conducts workshops, trainings, and advocacy on various issues, especially on children. AIF promotes visual anthropology through vibrant, authentic, meaningful ethnographic films and photo documentation. We also publish a quarterly multilingual digital magazine titled Childhood Matters and a monthly magazine titled Anthro Bulletin, along with our own publishing house called Anthropos Books. Our founder, Dr. Sunita Reddy, is an associate professor at the Center of Social Medicine and Community Health at Jawaharlal Nehru University. I also would like to take a moment to formally introduce our guest speaker for this lecture, Professor Subhadra Channa. Subhadra Channa is a retired professor of anthropology from Delhi University. Her areas of research interest are in gender, cosmology, inequality and marginalization, identity and urban studies. Her publications include Gender in South Asia by Cambridge University Press, The Inner and Outer Selves by Oxford University Press, Life as a Dalit by Sage Publications, Religious Pluralism in India by Routledge Publications, and the Dhobis of Delhi and Ethnography from the Margins by Oxford University Press. She has 12 books and more than 80 papers to her credit. She was the senior vice president of the IUAES and is at the present the co-editor of Reviews in Anthropology. Her awards include two Fulbright teaching fellowships, Charles Wallace, and several visiting professorships, as well as a Distinguished Teacher Award from Delhi University. At present, she is the co-editor of the journal Reviews in Anthropology. Uh, uh,
Thank you, Duri. Thank you so much for introducing our guest lecture speaker. I would like to now welcome Professor Subhadra to start our talk. And then once you're done, ma'am, we'll have question answer session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thanks to all the people whose name I could read and I could talk to. I could see Professor Mishra, Professor Anil Kumar, Professor Amitabh Pandey, Neeta Mawar, and all those whom I know and whom I do not know. Thank you all for joining this lecture. Now, the theme is something which I think is a little mystified. When people talk of feminism or a feminist anthropology, most often a lot of people are not very sure what they are talking about, what they are looking for. What is feminist anthropology? And is feminist anthropology the same as feminism? Is feminist anthropology the same as gender studies or women's studies? And my answer to all this is no. Feminist anthropology is something to which I will just come before I explain the other. From somewhere around the Second World War, also at a time when the world was going through what we call as the liberation struggles against colonization. This is the period of time when almost in many parts of the world, including Europe, including India, when women came out of their homes. Women were also getting formal education. Women, for the first time in many years, I'm not saying that women never had a voice, but there was a period during the colonial period and during, this medieval to this period, pre-modern era, when a large number of women, or in general, society had muted the women. Muted in the sense in which Edward Adler calls it, in a sense of structural muting, that women were not in any structural position to bring out their voices. Not that they did not have power. Now, these are very problematic issues. We cannot always say that women did not have power, or that women did not have did not have any position, or they did not have any voice. What just that I'm sorry, I'll have to edit it out of the recording.
No problem.
The women did have power, but what they did not have was structural positions from where their voices could be heard, or their positions or their opinions would matter. And if I just confine myself to India, we find that during the freedom struggle, a lot of women's issues were discussed. And these were discussed by women who were at that time gaining some kind of a recognition in society, women who could read, write, who were learned, participating in the freedom struggle, women who were running magazines. If you read the book, Recasting Women, edited by Kumkum Sangari and Sudesh Vyad, I think this is one of the most wonderful collection of women's voices during this period, during the just around the time when India was gaining freedom. But these were mostly women's issues. But at that time itself, the concept of woman started getting problematized. When reading these or listening to these voices, other sections of women raised their voices, who said that the problems and issues that these women, that is the upper middle class, educated, liberated women, were discussing, things like, say, child marriage or widow remarriage, these were not the problems of a majority of women who belong to the marginalized sections of society. For example, the women from the lower caste, women who were workers, women who were in menial positions. They had different issues. So once this category of women, and the similar things happened in Europe, in America, where Black women started speaking against the voices of the white women, middle class women, the marginal women, indigenous women, African. So we find that the deconstruction of the concept of woman, the de-essentializing of this woman, gave then rise to the concept of gender. Gender, see, earlier to this, when even women's issues were being discussed, woman was taken as a given category, as some kind of a natural entity, that some people are male, some people are female, in that sense. With all their, not just biological characters, but other characters as well. When the problematization of the concept of woman itself, the concept of gender came in, that what we see or what we call as a woman or as a man is not a given category, but it is a construction. A construction that varies from place to place, from different historical epochs. It is temporally and spatially differentiated. which gave rise to a complete, so you see, we are going from one theoretical premise to another theoretical premise. Now the paradigm shift is that from taking woman as for granted, as a category, as a natural category, we have now come to a shift where construction that woman or man, both, are seen as not givens, but as constructions. One of the major contributions in this area was the work of Margaret Mead with her work on the sex and temperament in three primitive societies, which to the American women, and I was reading about it from a feminist perspective, that what impact historically and at that time socially this book had on women was that biology is not destiny. In short, if you are born as something which becomes culturally recognized as a woman, you are not bound to any characters. You can be many different things in many different contexts, and there are so-called women in different historical contexts, in different places, in different time periods, in different situations, who are different, who are not the same. So gender studies become popularized from the 70s onwards, from the famous books by Women, Culture and Society by Rosaldo and Lamphere. Then you have the Tours and Anthropology of Women by Anthropology of Women, and there are many other books that start coming out. In India, and I keep emphasizing on India because we must be very familiar with what the contribution of Indian scholars have been in this area. That's why I said I begin this with the feminist anthropology in India. In India, during the 70s and 80s, significant contribution was made by women scholars like Leela Dubey and many others who said and who criticized the Western gender construction in that dichotomous model of male and female who are in a pair bonding relationship or a sexual relationship, which of course derives from the original Freudian model, which was again, previously discussed by Lacan, Kristeva, and all the feminist psychoanalysts and others who have criticized it. One of the major criticism which I liked a lot was that of Naomi Klein, a student of Freud, who had said that when Freud talks of the early childhood experiences, he gives prime position to the father, that it is the Oedipal complex, the desire, the father, the absence of the penis. So it is all around as if the child's early social experiences are all about the father. But she says that the father comes in much later in an infant's life. It is the mother, the breastfeeding mother, the mother who gives birth, who is the prime and the primary, relation that an infant first in a relation of an infant is to the mother and not to the father. And Freud had ignored the role of the mother, the nurturing, the life-giving role of the mother for the life. But that's another issue. I will not go into that. In India, the women anthropologists and others like Meera Desai, they said that women in India have many other roles, gender roles. For example, the intersection of gender with kinship. The woman as a mother, the woman as a sister, the woman as a daughter. Now, these in India are very much a part of the Indian ethos, the Indian cosmology. We are probably the only culture where the brother-sister relationship is a core relationship of society. We celebrate it. We have so many ceremonies, Raksha Bandhan, Bhai Dooj, and other mythologies. We have deities who are brothers and sisters, Jagannath, Subhadra, and my namesake, and Balaram. Now, I don't think in any other part of the world we have, or we must be having among indigenous cultures many, but mostly dominant religions have, at least the Judeo-Christian religions do not emphasize so much on the brother-sister bond. And then the mother figure. Of course, the mother figure had been ubiquitous, we know, but then these were all part of a non-Western kind of cultures. Then the daughter, again, a very important role. Then, the non-kinship friendship, the sakha, the sakhi. I mean, these kind of roles have been so important. Women's friendship amongst women, the sakhis, the sakhas, the friendship among men and women. Now, these roles had somehow, maybe they existed at some time in Western culture, but by the time the feminists started speaking, when they started discussing gender roles, these have somehow, in all that Western discourse, have got subdued, have not been found prime position. And this is where the Indian scholars have made significant contribution. And they have brought in that we cannot think of the woman only as a sexual object, but a woman's the construction of gender includes diverse aspects of womanhood. And then there was significant work also in terms of what we call, and then we find this intersectionality, the gender as something which is not confined to just sexuality, but is intersected by different dimensions of society. In the West, race came in as a very important aspect of intersection, class for the Marxist. And so we find that how the whole discourse, which started with simply from women, has becomes more and more complicated, more and more generalized and diverse. And come to feminist approach, it takes on another dimension. Feminism is a methodology. It is a way of looking at the world. A world which is not constructed through one dominant mode of subjective interpretation. And this is what the core thrust of feminist methodology is about. Deconstructing the core of the production of knowledge. Till the feminist methodology takes root, which is, I would say, around the 90s, because that is around the time we have most of the really important feminist works, the feminist methodological works start coming in. It is a critical point of view. A critical point of view which de-recognizes the truth value of the knowledge which they say was produced from a dominant center. This dominant center was identified as the white male. But of course, the white male again has many layers and shades. For example, when we talk of Eurocentrism, Eurocentrism does not include East Europeans. It does not include the marginal areas of Europe. It does not include, for example, those parts of Italy or Spain like Catalonia and other places which are politically marginalized. When we talk of Western men, and if you look into all the, the names that hold center stage, we find French, German, British, mostly names coming from Western Europe and also from the dominant communities of those. America, the same. So, but the fact remains that, yeah, it is a white male dominant center, which initially was accepted as the producers of knowledge. Our forefathers were mostly forefathers, and feminists have started looking for. And this is, I'm saying, how the feminist methodology critiqued. So when women, feminists were looking for the sources of knowledge production, even for anthropology, they started to look for what they called as the four mothers. Were there no women anthropologists in America? Were there no women anthropologists in Europe or England? When we have names like Radcliffe Brown, Malinowski, Monet, Evans Pritchard, this and that, and Boas. And so, at least in America, you did have Ruth Benedict, you had Hortense Powdermaker, you had, Ruth Wenzel, then Margaret Mead, of course. So these names had come up and they had made significant contribution, but their contribution was still within the theoretical framework that was set for them by the male knowledge producers, by the positivist school, by the, certain theoretical paradigms that were produced. And they followed within that, although they did break out sporadically because they were women. Like I just mentioned Margaret Mead's work on sex and temperament. And then, others, that actually those works we are not even familiar with. It is only when now, almost in the last couple of decades, that a lot of names have come out. For example, Zora Neale Hurston. Now, Zora Neale Hurston today is a famous novelist. It's known as a famous novelist. But Zora Neale Hurston was also an anthropologist. She was a student of Boas. But her work as an anthropologist is not taught in any syllabus of anthropology. So this is the critical point of view which feminist anthropologists have started to bring in, critiquing the whole knowledge producing process where women's voices were subdued, marginalized, and sometimes and quite often muted. Not always muted, but quite often muted, so that very few voices came out and got recognition. We know only of me, then Cora Dubois and Benedict, but there were many others. In India, similarly, one of the earliest, and I think she was, although at that time there was no concept of women's or studies or gender studies or feminist studies, but in my own paper on Iravati Karve, I had identified that she had the critical faculty of the feminist approach to deconstruct the knowledge or the interpretations. It was both from the point of view of knowledge, the data or the facts or whatever, the narratives, the text, and their interpretation. The interpretation that Iravati Karve has given in her book Yuganta of the Mahabharata and its characters is a totally different interpretation from the, the dominant, the Brahmanical perspective, which is, so much revered. When you say that, for one example, which I don't know how many of you have read Yuganta, you must read it. She says that Gandhari is seen as epitome of a faithful wife, that she follows her husband by binding her eyes. But according to Iravati Karve, she takes revenge on her husband. It is an act of protest, not an act of being loyal. As an act of protest, she binds her eyes. to make her husband feel even worse. He is blind, and then she says, look, you are blind, you didn't tell me, you cheated me, I will take revenge on you. I mean, this is the kind of interpretation she has given. She has given different interpretations of Bhishma, and she has actually kind of deconstructed all these idealized characters of the mythologies. When we come further, see, anthropology was seen as the study of the other. The study of the other from the perspective of a self, a subjective self, which constructed itself as a core, as a subject position that was privileged. Like when Evans Pritchard goes to the field, or when Malinowski goes to the field, they look at the field, they look at the Trobrianders, the Nuers, the Andaman Islanders as the others. Others seen through a positivist or an objective point of view. Which was this objective point of view? This objective point of view was the point of view of the male anthropologist, who is supposed to be knowledgeable and trained anthropologist. So whatever they say was to be taken as factual truth, timeless. So we do not have a study called the Andaman Islanders as studied by Radcliffe Brown in the 1920s. We have a book which is simply called The Andaman Islanders. That is, the Andaman Islanders have been fixed in time and space forever, for eternity, as the Andaman Islanders. No other suffix or prefix has been added. Now, the women were already constituted as the other. In every culture, especially even in the West, where most of this knowledge was in produced, and where I would not say feminism started in the feminism, as I see in India, started during the Bhakti movement. It probably started even earlier during the ancient period, when women were writing, when women had their own versions of the. For example, we have women's verses, female versions of the Ramayana. We have female versions of the myths. We have Sita's story, as Nobonita Dev Sen has identified this particular Ramayana, which is seen, which has been written by a woman from Sita's perspective. So feminist voices were there, but they were never recognized and picked up as feminist voices. So what was recognized and picked up as feminist voices first came from the West, and then people realized, okay, no, these things have been done before. And so as other feminist scholars from India, from abroad, they came and they said, okay, this is also there. And we had Akka Mahadevi, we had Mirabai, who were all feminist voices. So when women anthropologists started to analyze, they realized they were already the other. They were already the other, and therefore for them, the other, that is the field that they were studying, was from a very different perspective. How? For example, when Annette Weiner restudied Trobriand Islanders, she found that looking from his male gaze or male standpoint, his so-called objective standpoint, scientific standpoint, as they used to present it, that we are scientific, we are positivist, we are objective. Malinowski never thought of including the data about women in his entire exchange theory. He simply ignored. He saw women were doing something, they were making skirts, and he just dismissed it as unconsequential work. So when women started to study other cultures, they found that they have already been othered in that culture. That data about them have not been collected. Any information about them have not been included. How much we know about Nuer women from Evans Pritchard's work on the Nuer? It seems all about men and their lineages and their cattle raids, and there's hardly anything about mothers, about daughters, about women's relation, about nothing, you know. So this gave rise to that concept which we call today as positionality, which is a feminist contribution. It comes from the works of Lila Bulogod, of the concept of Donna Haraway, which is that whenever data is collected, it is never from a it is never from an objective point of view. It is never a total truth. It is always a partial truth from a particular situation. And the situation is an interpretation from the subjective self of the anthropologist. Now, the subjectivity of the self, the construction of the anthropologist, this came about only when women who were already constructed as the other. So, from that other's point of view, when they started studying those who were also considered as others, there was a convergence of this othering where they found that, okay, we have been othered in the process of data collection. We have been othered in the process of interpretation. We have been othered in the entire constructions of cultures and societies by not being there at all. So this gave, and then there's a lot of debates around that time. In the 70s, we have the debate where Derek Freeman critiques Margaret Mead's position as an anthropologist, saying that she didn't collect the data properly and she was not treated well by the informants who treated her as a girl, not given. So there was, a critiquing of the authenticity or the so-called, infallibility of the data, like, the Andaman Islanders. Now, there have been a lot of post-colonial critiques. A very major work was done on gender and colonialism, where women anthropologists like Eleanor Leacock and one person more, I forget. So they have criticized how, in their interpretations of the colonized people, not just anthropologists, but all Western people have identified women always as negative. If you remember, I don't know how many of you have studied evolution, social evolution, Bakunin's work, where he constructs the mother right and father right societies and puts them on an evolutionary scale. All the societies which are considered as matrilineal or giving importance to women are considered by Bakunin to be backward or lower in evolutionary scale, because women were not supposed to be rulers or having importance in society, because again, what Sherry Otner had talked about, or what is the discourse on women women nature, women as nature, men as culture, which came out from Renaissance Europe, where women were delegated to an inferior position, saying that, they do not have enough consciousness, the social consciousness, the superior consciousness of reason. Rather, they are driven by instinct. So they said that if that is so, then any society which gives privilege to women is bound to be a backward or lower in evolutionary scale, cultural evolution scale, because women do not have those superior abilities to produce superior culture. In fact, Bakunin said that the conquest of the East by the West is actually a civilizing process, which of course we know later on that how these theories were used to justify colonization. I will not go into that area. I come back to feminist methodology. So the feminist methodology deconstructs the truth value of whatever studies have been done. And this is not only in anthropology. This was done in many other fields. In history, like Virginia Woolf makes a very interesting comment. She says that women have been thought to be very good to write poetry on. People know there are verses and verses. Nobody writes a poetry about a man. Everybody writes about women, their beauty, their grace, their this, their that. But women are never included in history. They are all poetry, but they are not historical subjects. Nobody talks about women in history. Very little position is given to women in history or recognition. So this is how the feminist perspective brought in this notion of deconstructing the knowledge that was already produced. The second, very important as anthropologists, the concept of culture. Now, cultural relativism gave a lot of importance to culture as a whole, culture as something which has an identity, culture as something which bestows identity on groups. And this concept of cultural identity, ethnic identity, etc., had become a very strong political motivation. In today's world also it is there, that groups, communities, ethnic identities assert themselves on the basis of their culture. Culture which is seen as something which belongs to the group. But from a feminist perspective, and this is, as I said, feminist perspective is a critical perspective, they say that men and women, the same culture, is not experienced the same by men and women. Most cultures, most so-called identities and traditions are those that privilege patriarchy, because patriarchy had been the norm. I've seen, and I've talked to Naga women, and now a lot of Naga women scholars have come up, and they are writing about their own society. It is critical of their own culture. In what ways? Not that they are, they don't have the pride of being Nagas and they don't, but certain parts of it, like the strictly patrilineal forms of inheritance. So many young Naga women I have met, they said we would rather have the Indian, the Hindu, the main stream Indian civil laws rather than our customary laws. Now, the customary laws were given to the indigenous people for their identity preservation. But whose identity is being preserved? By and large, it is the male identities. You see? And these questions have come up again and again in feminist discourse. For example, when you talk of genital mutilation. Now, genital mutilation is seen in many parts in societies as a cultural practice, as something that is part of their identity and conscience. But from the women's point of view, Women may accept it. I'm not saying that women don't accept it and they also do not consider it as part of their identity. But looking at it from the point of view of how it actually affects women, how it affects and how it, negatively impacts their body, we cannot say that all cultural practices are functional or, that cultural relativity. So you have, what the feminists have brought out is that whole paradox or the conflict between culture, identity, and a general humanism of human rights, of women's rights over their bodies. Now, if a woman does not have a right over her body, and that is also seen as cultural, as seen as something which is an item of, I mean, we have had a lot of in India. We are have this debate about customary laws and the general positions of women, and how the positions of women is not always favored. That is why the Hindu laws were changed, laws of inheritance, laws of say age at marriage, age at consent. All these have been changed for a more favorable, more humanistic uh, approach, which takes into account the rights of women as well as social persons, the social personhood person. You see, in most patrilineal societies, traditionally, women did not have equal personhood as men. This personhood does not mean that women did not have any power. See, these are very complex issues. When the feminists said that the private is political, it meant a lot of things. It brought in issues like today it is all, I mean, this is all from the feminist perspective. See, it is not confined, as I said, it's not confined to anthropology. It comes in law, it comes in policy making, it comes in governance, it comes in history, geography, science as well. In many ways, like primate behavior. I was reading these works of feminist anthropologists on primate behavior, that how the male dominant, the malehood, the dominant male, all these kind of models which were given by the early anthropologists who studied who were men. It was a kind of a, uh, they were already so entrenched in the male dominance model that the way they studied or the way they interpreted the data, it only went towards confirming that male dominant model. Whereas later women anthropologists who went and studied primates found the concept of the dominant female, the dominant mother amongst the dominant mother. So these were, things that came out. I was archaeological interpretations. I was reading one which says that, see, in the early cave paintings, you find stick figures. And stick figures were, uh, uh, they don't have any, sexual characters, most of them. Some of them have. But all the warring, the hunting figures were identified as male, only because of what they were doing. Nobody tried to find out if women of that prehistoric period were also hunters. Did they also use a spear? We don't know. But these were interpretations that were made keeping an already existing model. So you see, when, I can do a lot of talking on, um, you know, feminist methodology. But what the primary points that I wanted to make was that feminist anthropology deconstructed established methodological norms, established norms of knowledge production and truth production, they brought in concepts of positionality, of partial truths, of intersubjectivity, of deconstructing this whole concept of culture as sacrosanct. No, culture is not necessarily experienced similarly by every, even now, the class, like earlier Marxist and feminists had critiqued the concept of class, saying that class is not experienced the same by men and women and by different men and different women. Then you have many other forms of intersection, not just men, women, there is age, there is disability, there is situations, there is historical situations, there is marginalities, there are different kinds of women, there are different kinds of men. Like Aparna Rao in her work on autonomy has talked of the concept of shakshiyat, personhood. She said not all men have a dominant shakshiyat, I mean, according to even the society. This is also intersected by other factors like their masculinity. And a very important dimension again of when we talk of patriarchy. Patriarchy does not mean, which normally people say, that men are dominant. No, it does not at all mean that men are dominant. What it means is that masculine values are dominant. Example, even today, as of today, when we say that a woman has achieved something, what do we say? Oh, she has broken the barriers of gender. She has entered and excelled in the male professions. She has become a fighter pilot. She has become a wrestler. Why? Because society still holds masculine performances as superior to women's performance. We never praise a woman for being, a very good mother or raising. Very few. I just happened to come across a book called The Four Mothers or something like that, which talks about the mothers of prominent African American leaders who were very prominent historically, but nobody talked about the way they were raised by women who faced all odds to raise their sons to be what they were. So we never talk about those things. We start talking about women making progress only when they do work that men are doing. That means that at the societal level, we are still privileging masculine values. We are still patriarchal. Even if women become pilots, women become whatever, they get, as long as they get praised only for doing what men do, society is patriarchal. And this has nothing to do with men and women. It has to do with the overall value system that a society has. Now, I will stop here so that we can have some time for question and answers.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was such an interesting lecture. You've spanned a lot of surface by tracing historically and globally also women's voices when they started and how they've been marginalized most often, and especially the invisibility of women and their works in the past. But of late, like a couple of decades, that women scholars have come up, especially from the Western scholars and also many Indian scholars, women.
Many Indian scholars are there. We
Yes.
have talked, and even Indian scholars from the marginal groups, Dalit women, and not all of these works are anthropological, but they have anthropological value. For example, the works of, say, Meenakshi Moon and Urmila Pingle, the two Dalit scholars, women scholars who have written about their experiences. And, Bama, I mean, I have read a lot of very important feminist voices. Ruth Vanita, and they have Susie Tharu. Ruth Vanita and Susie Tharu have edited this whole work on women's voices. They're very important.
And especially when you said that men are raised by women. Half the world are women and half the world are raised by women, and still patriarchy exists. So that's very interesting to see. Women are even the well-achieved men. Their mothers are not known, and their works are not known. So there are so many interesting aspects of feminist anthropology and anthropology of women, and then women studies, gender studies. There are so many overlapping categories. I think that's an important aspect to understand and also see how they are different and how we need to have a clarity on that. So we really enjoyed listening to you, ma'am, and I would like our senior colleagues to share their thoughts. And we have a couple of more people who have joined. Shalina ma'am has joined, and we also have Lalit Kumar ji has joined. So many of them, I probably you also know them. Would be happy to have your comments and your points. I think there are a couple of questions in the chat box also. I think Neeta ma'am has already put in. Are you able to read or shall I spell out?
No, I can read.
So,
Good evening to all. Please join me. The Grace started an useful interpretation of was Harappan culture matrilineal prior to Aryan invasion? Now, that is not a question that has any validity because, firstly, very little is known of Harappan culture, and the Aryan invasion is still in the nature of a myth. We really don't know what happened. So, I mean, that is very speculative. I cannot answer. I don't think anybody can answer that because we have neither any knowledge of Harappan culture. That is, some reconstructions have been done, but very little is known about it because the Harappan script is not yet fully deciphered. And the Aryan invasion, we are still debating whether there was something called an Aryan. As far as known, there were movements of people from various parts, from the Central Asia, but as to an Aryan invasion, I think that has already been established as a myth.
yeah.
So,
And then
what else question is
another
there?
question by Deepti.
Where is Deepti?
Just below that.
Ranji, Lalit. Gender responsive. Well, Lalit, I had already talked that in India we do have a lot of legal. I don't know much about budgets because I am not a specialist, I am not a administrator or an IAS. But what I know is that legal position, from the legal point of view, yes, a lot of feminists, I think lawyers have got a lot of work done. For example, giving primacy to the mother's name. Today, you can get a child enrolled in school. A mother can get her child enrolled in school in her name, which was not possible earlier. You had to give the father's name. Now, father's name is not necessary. The mother has the right. Similarly, unmarried women can also adopt. So there are many good feminist legal, I would say, improvements. Budget, I'm not a specialist in budget, sorry.
There are, in fact, now a lot of discussions on gender budgeting, especially when
There is a lot of discussion on gender budgeting. In fact, I was called to Hindu College to do a gendered analysis of their whatever they are doing, the construction and all, and they showed me, how women are being incorporated in the structure, the physical structure of the college.
even the laws, there are
They're
so
very
many,
important things.
so many laws which are the welfare and protection of women, starting
Yeah,
from
no,
how.
I mean, see, again, Sunita, whenever we keep talking of welfare and protection is a very patriarchal attitude.
Yes, yeah.
Because then you're considering women are already weak victims, they need protection and they need welfare. That is, you're taking away the agency from them. Those very terms are very demeaning and show a very strong patriarchal bias. That is what I said. We do not recognize patriarchy where it exists.
Yes, yes.
So that we keep saying, oh, women pilots, women this, women army officers. But do we realize that in this way we are actually strengthening the patriarchal bias? That is, we are strengthening the patrilineal, the militarist, masculine model. You see, the whole criticism of feminists are that the world is being ruled by the militarist, masculinist model. Who is great? Who is a hero? The war hero. Not the domestic mother. No. People who go for peace are not seen as heroes. People who go for war are seen as heroes. This is not male domination. In that sense, it is masculine value domination. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So
And
whenever we say this, that women's welfare, women's this thing, I think that is the most demeaning thing that, and it shows the most patriarchal attitudes. We'll come and save you. We'll come and do something for you. You are not capable of doing anything for yourself.
yes, ma'am. And there's another question by Deepti. In what ways does Indian feminist anthropology diverse from or align with Western feminist anthropology framework?
Yeah. Of course, the women, they are aligned because they have also taken that critical perspective, which is a general feminist methodology. What they have made significant contributions, as I said, see, showing the intersection between gender and the kinship, the importance of kinship, which has been almost ignored in Western feminism, which has focused so much on the sexual dyad, which I talked about earlier. Maybe she missed it. And second is this intersection of caste and gender, and also reinterpretation of myths and, that indigenous constructions and the indigenous, the points where women's, values and the feminine values have been also emphasized and also de-recognized.
Yeah, Mishra sir, you want to say something?
Yes, am I audible, Sunita?
Yes, sir.
Yes, madam. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for this wonderful presentation. And in fact, I was waiting to listen to you and your interpretation of feminist anthropology, particularly in Indian context. But before that, I must congratulate a person and an institution. First of all, I remember in the March issue of Anthro Bulletin, Sunita, if you remember, in the March issue of Anthro Bulletin, the chief editor, Professor Shalina, has given a kind of her editorial remark, and it was precisely on the women or the feminist anthropology in Indian context. In the same issue, Professor Subhadra Channa, have you seen that anthropological bulletin March issue by chance? It is a digital magazine. And in the same issue, the AIF team has also brought out the eminent Indian, women anthropologists. So in the same issue, it's very interesting. But coming to your presentation, ma'am, you are an expert in the field, and I know nothing of feminism or feministic anthropology. But then what I noticed was that very beautifully you have brought out the power dimension of feminism or feminist anthropology. Excellent. That was, I completely agree with you that there is some kind of a power dimension which concerns all of us. But at the same time, I would like to throw light on, very briefly, on the structural dimension of feminism. Ma'am, I'll not go into the theory. I will go into the examples. If you remember that you had written an article for me for my book, Recent Studies on Indian Women. So I edited
The ideal Indian woman.
Yes, if you remember, ma'am, you had brought out you have discussed two concepts as ambivalent categories among women. And from Bengali novel, I don't remember, you have said Devi and Dasi. You have used. One is the mistress,
those were the structure. Those were the intersections of gender and caste.
Yes. So Devi and Dasi.
So yeah, that see, there are so many. I cannot speak of everything because those things I have already written about. So I did not mention that. Of course, the structural dimensions are very important. Initially, when I talked of muting, I said muting does not mean physically, I mean, voice being suppressed, that you cannot speak, but that you are not heard. Structurally, you are in a position from which your voice is not heard.
Yes, ma'am, I've got a little confusion. I would request you to clear my confusion. The confusion is this, as you said, that we are taking culture as one category, but then, there are different facets of culture that one can study. My question here is, or my confusion here is, probably you can clarify, should I study a woman from the perspective of a Devi or a Dasi? This is my first clarification I need from you as a feminist anthropologist. The second one is from my own field work. I have seen that in many tribal societies, particularly I'm talking about the Dongriya Kond, which have become very popular after the Supreme Court judgment. There is a position called Bejuni. Bejuni is a female shaman, and it is almost exclusively left to the women. When people say that women are the power dimension, when people deal with, they say that it is, as you also said, there is some kind of masculinity. Why some of the positions are earmarked for the women exclusively? Similarly, for the preservation of the seeds for the next season, agricultural season, it is the domain of the women, those who preserve the seeds, and then they worship it in their own way. And men have no role in that kind of activity. So I'm really a little confused. I think I'm not
Sorry,
confusing.
there is no confusion there. See, when we talk of women, and that is why this whole concept of gender came in, and this whole thing of deconstructing, one model. It was, in fact, even Sherry Ortner, after she had written her paper, that very famous paper as Women as Culture, Nature and Men as Culture, has rewritten the paper saying that, okay, that is, you see, even in my own work on the Jad Bhotiyas, I have shown that it is just the opposite. That in their society, women are seen as culture, as social, as dominant in the society, maintaining social relations, doing everything, looking after the village, political, everything is in the hands of women, and men are seen in the appropriately as part of nature, as wild, as going away as shepherds in the forests and all that. So there is no dichotomous model. Devi and Dasi, if you have not read the paper, you would remember that I had talked of an ideal model. I mean, in fact, that paper was later developed into the book, Gender in South Asia, in an entire book, where I have talked of all the complexities of that particular dichotomous model, which is actually based on caste. That is based on that women of lower caste in Bengal, I don't know, in Orissa also, women of lower caste, non-Brahmin women, used to have the suffix Dasi in front of their names. And only Brahmin women could use the suffix Devi. So Annapurna Devi Pandey is Devi because she's a Brahmin. But supposing if I want to put a suffix in the traditional system, I cannot write Devi, I will have to write Dasi because I'm not a Brahmin. So from that particular point, I had brought out how there are different models, ideal models. These are not real. These are ideal models of womanhood. The Brahmin woman is a different model from a say a Dhobi woman, untouchable woman, a woman who works in the fields, a woman who is a shopkeeper, a woman from a Brahmin caste, a woman from a Kshatriya caste. A woman from a Kshatriya caste can become a queen. Brahmin women cannot. What I had written was that entire book elaborates on this. This is not a dichotomous model. This is just an ideal clue to deconstructing the concept of gender in the context of a caste-based society. Women are not the same in Indian society. You understand what I'm trying to say? There is not one woman category in Indian society. She is not either Dasi or Devi.
This is the confusion. This is the confusion.
Very
This is the
strongly related to the caste group from where she comes, the class from where she comes, the family from where she comes. There are a whole lot of, from her, whether she's a widow, she's married, she's unmarried, life cycle. So there are many complex cross-cutting intersectionalities of gender. I've written the whole book on it. You get the point?
Yes, yes. But then there is confusion, and maybe personally we can talk about it.
No, but what is the confusion? No, you are trying to say that is woman treated as a Devi in India. No, it depends on the situation and depends on which woman we are talking of. Some women, as I have shown that in Jayalalitha, for example, in Tamil Nadu, there were people who had made images of Jayalalitha and they were worshipping her as a Devi. But they will not do that with the Tamil, say, sweetress or a Tamil milk selling woman. Would they do that? No. So it is not that in Tamil Nadu women are worshipped as Devis. Some women could be worshipped as Devis depending upon their structural position. You understand?
Yeah, I do understand, but still there are problems. I think let others also participate.
I mean, the whole thing has been written in about 200 pages of my book, where I've discussed these things in very great details, giving examples, giving historical, literary, sources, and clarifying the whole point is what I'm talking of is intersectionality. That gender is not a uniform category, it is intersected by many other social and cultural variables.
May I just briefly intervene? I'm not going to stay for too long because it's always a pleasure listening to you, Subhadra. Just to answer something that Mishra ji is trying to create. In the popular discourse, it is very easy for us to conceptualize or reconstruct women either as what you are saying or what she probably discussed in her book, which I haven't read, so I have no business to comment on that, whether you are a Dasi or a Devi. But otherwise, also, you see, a woman are either conceptualized as witches or as Devis. So there are those.
Excuse me, Shelley, I didn't hear. What did you say?
I said either it's so easy in the popular discourse to reconstruct women either as witches or as Devis, So you can.
Witch is another category. Actually, witch is a third category, not exactly part of Devi. Shamanism, for example. You see, it is
you don't have male witches anywhere. Let's put it like that.
So, वो male तो फिर sorcerer हो जाएगा ना, shaman हो जाएगा. I mean, the name witch is a female term.
So it's to answer your this thing, what you are, Mishra ji is feeling so confused about. When you are a woman and you locate yourself in that reflexive discourse, how the images are reconstructed is something which are done very differently by men in whatever capacity they may be, whether they're academics or they're writers, or there are very few men have gone beyond that. So it's a construct that's very, very problematic from all perspective. When I saw the chat box, that I'm really not able to read very clearly because of my uh, vision not yet being focused. But what I can basically understand, the
You see,
question that
one thing is
Lalit
that, yeah, actually, yes.
Lalit had been asking about gender budgeting, something that has just been introduced in the year 2006 in the Indian budget. I mean, it's the kind of you earmark funding, but will funding change attitudes? That's again
Exactly. That is what
problematic.
I was saying, that as long as you keep thinking of women's welfare and women's development, and the attitude has not changed. You're still looking at them as weak, oppressed, marginalized, not able to do things for themselves. We are not, I don't know that, I mean, the patriarchal values are not changing. No.
And also to answer some others, the when you place it in the evolutionary perspective, most societies in that sense the term were matrilineal to begin with. Now, as a principle, it is not being accepted any longer, or is being decried or said. The other popular argument that has been stressed, that stretched a bit too long, that literacy is going to make a difference.
What?
Literacy is going to make a difference. Formal education is going to make a difference. It hasn't made any difference
This
whatsoever.
is what I'm saying, that but women become educated, they become professors, then you say, oh, she is doing the man's job. Oh, she has become a pilot. So again, you are only praising her job. That is the point. That is where societal values have not changed. They are still patriarchal when we praise a woman when she becomes a fighter pilot. And we do not praise a woman when she's for anything, or we do not praise a man for that matter who helps his wife out or whatever. She becomes rather a matter of a joke. Shamanism, see, Mishra ji also talks about all societies are same. Patriarchy is not the same in every society. Patriarchy manifests itself in some are strongly patriarchal. The simpler the societies are, the more indigenous the societies are, we find a dilution of patriarchy. Again, not, I mean, you cannot generalize. Of course, there are women shamans, there are women religious leaders, even in India. In amongst upper caste Hindus, look at all these matas and all. There are many women who hold religious power even in our Hindu caste society. So it is
To just
also, I mean, essentialism. In fact, feminists have critiqued this whole notion of essentialism, trying to say either this or that. Is she Desi? Is she Dasi? Is she Devi? Is she this? Is she? No, that is not the truth. The truth is that there are so many situations, the situationality that feminist methodology brings in, that yes, things are different in different situations. They have talked about, like the women's, I mean, the whole methodological problem of trying to say that this or that. That is where I think feminist methodology is the critique of that essentialism. And many of us are just caught in that essentialism. सब यही पूछ रहे हैं, is she that? I mean, that is not it. That is just not it. And I don't know, it will take much longer to explain that probably. I mean, Shally, you will understand. But
no, I'm just trying to my last comment, and then I'm afraid I have to go. I need to put some medicines in my eyes.
I know it's getting late also. It's getting late.
Misha ji, there is really no such thing called Indian feminist anthropology.
Yeah.
There is a methodological.
There is nothing. Yeah, there is nothing called Indian. There is.
So,
It's just a critical it's a methodology, it's a perspective, it is a different way of looking at things. That's it.
I think for almost all the questions, who've been trying to ask, some young scholars are wanting to know what is the difference between ecofeminism and feminist. It's just the way or
Yeah,
acknowledge the participation or the contribution that
exactly. It
women
is
have
the
made.
way that you look at the environment from a feminist perspective. Now, ecofeminism is something which values feminist concepts such as nurturance, life over death, nurturance over war. Nurturance over exploitation, for example. So, ecofeminism is only that relation to the environment. You should not have a masculinist, that militarist masculinist perspective of exploitation, control, but of nurturance, care, and the feminine way of relating to nature. That's it. It's the same thing. It's just applied in different ways. Anyway, I think we have done enough.
There are
I
two.
started to cough. My lungs are getting tired.
Just two comments. I think there are questions. So Baby asked, how do you see the gender equality and social inclusion approach? And the other question is from Duri. Why does people in India still believe feminism movement is a privilege? Fighting for basic equal rights is considered too much. That's a very little focus on explaining people that equality is right, not a privilege. So what would you like to say on this?
She have already said it.
Yeah.
She has already said it, that that is because the society remains patriarchal. That is it. So whenever we talk of equality, that is also an equality on masculine terms. See, when a woman goes to work in a corporate office, she is supposed to perform like a man. She is not expected to perform like a woman. Nobody cares to give her. I mean, of course, our legal, some, at least in government jobs, you have childcare leave and things like that. Some recognition is given, but it's not given in a corporate job. You are supposed to, take care of all your, like, it's like you have to be in a man's world and be a man in a man's world, then you are successful. So that is the crux of the problem. So that is what Shalina was saying, that education makes no difference, because after getting educated, all you are expected to do is to be a man in a man's world and not be a woman in a woman's world. We still live in a man's world. We do not live in a woman's world, and that is the issue.
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting points there. And it's not as simple. And as you said, it's quite complex and you have to
It
see.
is very complex. This is very complex. Similarly, like gender budgeting, what will it do unless values are changed, attitudes are changed? And something else was there about inclusion. I mean, talking of inclusion in what? You include women in military service. That is inclusion. And you do pay no attention to their needs as women. So, I mean, you have struggled as a woman. I have struggled as a woman. We know how unequal is the struggle against men in this world.
And more so when you go higher up in the positions, the competition becomes even stronger.
Even stronger, and the less you are able to live your life as a woman. That is the real problem.
So, any more points? Last question, or we wind up? It's such an interesting evening to listen to you, ma'am. And
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, all my friends who came. Thank you, Shelly. Thank you, Nita. Thanks, everyone whose names I cannot see.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I think we'll close here, but we look forward to listening to you, ma'am, in future. We'll share your YouTube lecture also, so that those who have missed today can hear you on YouTube. And I just wanted to share with everyone that, as you all know, every month Anthro Bulletin brings out Anthropologists of the Month. Last month, we had Mishra sir's life journey and anthropological journey. So basic questions are how they got into anthropology, what are their experiences as an anthropologist, and what messages they would like to give to the younger scholars. So along with that are the YouTube links of their lectures. So every month we are trying to cover one or the other senior anthropologist. This is more so for the younger generations who may be missing out on many senior, scholars, and especially they are even my teachers. So you can imagine you are third or fourth generation anthropologists, and you might not be knowing many of them, and might have not been taught by them. So we are lucky that we could hear them even now, thanks to the digital age and online lectures, that this is possible, that you all can join from wherever you are. And so keep following with our Anthro Bulletin, and we really look forward to more and more senior scholars to be on board every month, bringing their life journeys and also their beautiful lectures. So it becomes like a refreshing evening for us. So once in a month, and meeting people, knowing each other, seeing face to face on screen, and then talking to each other. So it was a pleasant evening. Thank you so much, ma'am, for sparing your valuable time. And
Thank you. Thank you, Sunita, so much.
Thank you, Shalini, ma'am. Thank you, everyone. We have many senior scholars here and also young scholars. I would like to thank AIF team, Aryan, Sabha, Habiba, all of you who have put together this program today, and Duri for introducing our guest speaker. So thank you so much, and we'll meet soon. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Bye. Namaskar, everyone.